The thunder of hooves echoed through Loveland, Colorado. As Grace Cooper ran breathlessly toward the ramshackle cabin she called home, her heart pounding with dread. The four men who held her father's debt were coming to collect. And this time, they weren't interested in money. It was 1878, and the West had swallowed better people than her father, William Cooper, a man with grand dreams but poor judgment. Grace clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she pushed through the cabin door, finding her father slumped at the kitchen table, an empty whiskey bottle beside him. "They're coming, Pa," she gasped, still catching her breath. "Mr. Holbrook and his men are riding this way." William Cooper raised bloodshot eyes to his 20-year-old daughter, his face etched with shame. "Gracie, I'm sorry. I tried to win it back. Thought I had a winning hand." "How much this time?" Grace demanded, moving to peek through the window. In the distance, she could see dust rising from the road. $500, he mumbled. Grace felt her stomach drop, an impossible sum for people like them. "We don't have that kind of money. We barely have enough to eat." Her father's shoulders sagged further. "Holbrook said. He said if I couldn't pay." The words seemed to choke him. "Said what, Pa?" Grace pressed, though a cold fear was already building inside her. "He said he'd take you instead. Said his men would draw lots." The color drained from Grace's face. Elias Holbrook owned half the businesses in Loveland, including the saloon where her father gambled away what little they had. His reputation for cruelty was well known, and the men who worked for him were even worse, violent, ruthless opportunists who preyed on the desperate. "I'll run," Grace said, moving toward her small trunk of belongings. Her father grabbed her wrist. "They'll find you. They'll burn what's left of our place, and they might kill me." Before Grace could respond, the sound of horses approaching silenced them both. She peered through the window again, seeing 4 riders dismount Holbrook, a portly man with a meticulously trimmed beard flanked by 3 of his enforcers. "Cooper, get out here," Holbrook's voice boomed. William stood shakily. "Stay inside, Gracie." But Grace followed him out onto the porch. She wouldn't cower inside while her fate was being decided, Holbrook's cold eyes fixed on her immediately. Well, here she is. Might be worth more than the debt, boys." The 3 men with him, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, a hulking brute with a broken nose, and a younger man with cruel eyes, all stared at Grace as if assessing livestock. "Please, Mr. Holbrook," William pleaded. "Give me more time. I can get your money." Holbrook laughed. "You've had 3 months, Cooper. I'm a businessman, not a charity." He gestured to Grace. "The arrangement was clear. You pay your debt or we take something of equal value." Grace felt a chill run through her. "I am not property to be traded," she said firmly, despite her fear. "Brave little thing," said the pockmarked man, stepping forward. "I like that." "So do I," said the brute. "I call first claim on her." The younger man spat tobacco juice near Grace's feet. "We'll draw lots like the boss said." Holbrook seemed amused by their eagerness. "Gentlemen, patience. We need to settle the business first." He turned to William. "Cooper, I'm giving you one last chance. My $500 by sundown or your daughter pays your debt, in whatever way my men see fit." William swayed slightly, his face ashen. "I don't have it. You know I don't." "Then we have a deal." Holbrook smiled coldly. "We'll return at sunset to collect." As they mounted their horses to leave, the younger man called out, "Better pack pretty dresses, girl. Where you're going, you'll need to look nice for customers." Their laughter echoed as they rode away, leaving Grace and her father in stunned silence. "What have you done?" Grace whispered, her voice breaking. William collapsed onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. "I'll fix this, Gracie. Somehow." But they both knew there was nothing he could do. In 6 hours they would return, and Grace's life would be over. Inside the cabin, Grace moved mechanically, packing her few belongings. She wasn't sure why. She certainly wouldn't need her mother's handkerchief or her treasured copy of Pride and Prejudice, where she was headed. But the familiar actions calmed her racing thoughts. "I could try to borrow from the Wilsons," William suggested, watching her from the doorway. "The Wilsons have 5 children and barely enough for themselves," Grace replied flatly. "Maybe Pastor Edwards." "Pa, stop." Grace set down the dress she was folding. "You've borrowed from everyone who would lend to you, and you lost it all." She didn't mention that most of it went to whiskey before it ever saw a poker table. Her father seemed to age before her eyes. "I never thought it would come to this." Grace looked at him, this broken shell of the man who had once carried her on his shoulders and promised her mother he'd keep their daughter safe. After her mother died of tuberculosis 3 years ago, William Cooper had steadily disappeared into a bottle, emerging only to make increasingly desperate attempts to reclaim their dwindling fortunes through gambling. A knock at the door made them both jump. "They're early," William whispered, fear lacing his voice. But when Grace cautiously opened the door, it wasn't Holbrook or his men. It was Tyler Hayes, a cowboy who worked at the Silver Creek Ranch north of town. Grace knew him by sight, but had spoken to him only a handful of times when he came to the general store where she worked. "Miss Cooper," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair matted from the wide brim. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "May I come in?" Grace hesitated, then stepped back to allow him entry. "Mr. Hayes, what brings you here?" Tyler Hayes was tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. At 28, he had a reputation as a skilled horseman and a fair man, though he kept mostly to himself. Some said he had come west to escape a past in Boston, but like many in the frontier, no one asked too many questions about where a man had been before. "I was in town," he explained, "and overheard something concerning at Holbrook's saloon." His eyes moved from Grace to her father. "Something about a debt and payment." William flushed with shame, unable to meet the cowboy's gaze. Grace lifted her chin. "It's not your concern, Mr. Hayes. With respect, Miss Cooper, I believe it is." Tyler's voice was steady. "Holbrook and his men were discussing their plans for you quite openly. It's not something decent folk should ignore." "And what would you know about our situation?" Grace challenged, though her defiance was a thin veil over her fear. "I know Holbrook is a predator who's ruined half the families in this territory," Tyler replied evenly. "And I know what they intend for you isn't something I can stand by and watch happen." William finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Unless you've got $500 to spare, there's nothing to be done." Tyler's expression remained unreadable. "How much time do you have?" "Until sunset," Grace answered. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Then we have a few hours to solve this problem." Grace asked, surprised. "Yes, Miss Cooper. We." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I don't make a habit of riding to the rescue, but I also don't abide by men who treat women like chattel." For the first time since Holbrook's visit, Grace felt a flicker of hope, though she quickly tamped it down. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why would you help us?" she asked. "You barely know us." Tyler's gaze shifted to the window, as if checking the position of the sun. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Holbrook do, and I've regretted not stepping in before." He turned back to her. "Besides, no one deserves what they have planned for you." William stood up straighter, a glimpse of the proud man he'd once been showing through. "I can't ask another man to pay my debts." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Tyler replied, "but we need to move quickly." "I have a plan, but it requires some preparation." "What kind of plan?" Grace asked warily. "One that doesn't involve you being handed over to those men," Tyler said firmly. "But I need you to trust me." Grace studied him. She didn't know this man well, but something in his steady gaze made her want to believe him. What choice did she have, anyway? "What do you need us to do?" she finally asked. Tyler's plan was simple but risky. He would confront Holbrook and his men when they returned, offering to clear William's debt in exchange for leaving Grace alone. If Holbrook refused, which was likely, Tyler was prepared to force the issue. "You can't face all four of them," Grace protested, as Tyler checked his revolver. "I won't be alone," Tyler assured her. "I sent word to friends who owe me favors." He glanced at William. "No offense, Mr. Cooper, but you'd best stay inside when they arrive. You're in no condition to help if things get difficult." William nodded, the brief surge of dignity already fading. He retreated to the kitchen table, where an unopened bottle of whiskey sat temptingly. Grace watched him with a mixture of pity and resentment. He wasn't always like this, she felt compelled to explain. "After my mother died—" "You don't owe me explanations, Miss Cooper," Tyler interrupted gently. "We all have our burdens to bear." For a moment, Grace wondered what burdens this quiet cowboy carried, but there was no time for such curiosities now. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the mountains. "What about me?" she asked. "What should I do when they come?" "Stay on the porch where I can see you," Tyler instructed. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Let me handle Holbrook." As the afternoon wore on, Grace found herself watching Tyler as he made preparations, positioning his horse for a quick departure if necessary, checking sight lines around the cabin, moving a water trough to provide cover. He moved with a quiet confidence that was reassuring. "Have you done this sort of thing before, Mr. Hayes?" she finally asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not exactly this, no, but I've faced down men like Holbrook before." And Tyler met her gaze steadily. "I'm still here." The sun was touching the peaks of the Rocky Mountains when they heard horses approaching. Tyler positioned himself casually against the porch railing, his stance relaxed, but his eyes alert. Grace stood by the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, her father had succumbed to the whiskey bottle's temptation and was mercifully unconscious. Holbrook and his 3 men rode up in a cloud of dust, looking surprised to see Tyler there. They dismounted cautiously, hands hovering near their guns. "Well, what do we have here?" Holbrook drawled. "Tyler Hayes, isn't it? The Easterner playing cowboy at Silver Creek." "Holbrook," Tyler acknowledged with a slight nod. "This is private business, Hayes," the pockmarked man growled. "Best ride on." Tyler didn't move. "I'm making it my business, Carter." Holbrook's eyes narrowed. "Is that so? And what gives you the right to interfere in a legitimate debt collection?" "There's nothing legitimate about what you're planning," Tyler replied calmly. The brute with the broken nose laughed. "Cooper knew the terms when he borrowed the money. His girl is payment." "She's a person, not payment," Tyler said, his voice hardening. "And I'm here to clear Cooper's debt." Grace stared at Tyler in shock. Was he really offering to pay $500, a small fortune, for people he barely knew? Holbrook looked equally surprised. $500 is a lot of money for a ranch hand." "I have it," Tyler stated simply. The younger man spat again. "Boss, we had an agreement. The girl was promised." "Quiet, Jenkins," Holbrook snapped, his calculating eyes fixed on Tyler. "I'm curious why Mr. Hayes is so invested in this matter." "My reasons are my own," Tyler replied. "Do we have a deal?" Holbrook stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Perhaps the price has gone up. The girl is quite lovely and my men were looking forward to her company." Grace felt bile rise in her throat. Tyler's hand moved closer to his gun. "The price was $500. That's what Cooper owes. That's what I'm paying." "And if I refuse?" Holbrook challenged. "Then we have a problem," Tyler said quietly. The tension in the air was palpable. Grace held her breath, watching as the men sized each other up. Holbrook's men were spreading out slightly, trying to flank Tyler. Just then, the sound of approaching riders broke the standoff. 3 men on horseback appeared, stopping a short distance away. Grace recognized them as ranch hands from Silver Creek. "Thought you might want some company, Hayes," called the oldest of the newcomers, a grizzled man with a silver beard. Tyler didn't take his eyes off Holbrook. "Appreciate it, Matthews." The odds had shifted, and Holbrook knew it. His confident smile faltered slightly. "Well now," he said, adjusting his jacket, "this is becoming quite the social gathering." "Just business," Tyler replied evenly. $500 to clear Cooper's debt completely, and Miss Cooper stays here, untouched and free." Holbrook glanced at his men, whose hands still hovered near their weapons, then back at Tyler and his reinforcements. After a tense moment, he shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "Very well, Hayes. If you're fool enough to throw away good money on these people, who am I to stop you?" Tyler reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to Holbrook, who caught it one-handed and quickly verified the contents. "I want a receipt," Tyler said, "and I want you to say it clear so everyone here hears it." Holbrook's face darkened at being dictated to, but he complied. "William Cooper's debt is paid in full," he announced loudly. "We have no further business with him, or his daughter." "And she's free," Tyler prompted. Holbrook's eyes flashed with anger, but he forced a thin smile. "And the girl is free, of course." The pockmarked man, Carter, stepped forward. "This ain't right, boss. You promised—" "Shut up, Carter," Holbrook hissed. "We're leaving." But Carter wasn't ready to give up so easily. His hand dropped to his gun. "I don't take orders from rich boys playing cowboy." Everything happened in an instant. Carter drew, but Tyler was faster, his revolver clearing its holster in a fluid motion. The shot rang out and Carter stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. "Anyone else?" Tyler asked quietly, his gun still raised. The other men raised their hands slightly, showing they weren't looking for trouble. "Get him out of here," Holbrook ordered the brute, who helped Carter back onto his horse. "This isn't over, Hayes," Holbrook added in a low voice. "For today it is," Tyler replied. The 4 men mounted their horses and rode away, Carter cursing through his pain, Holbrook's rigid back radiating fury. When they were out of sight, Tyler holstered his gun and turned to Grace. She was staring at him with wide eyes. "Are you all right, Miss Cooper?" he asked. Grace nodded mutely, then found her voice. You paid my father's debt, all of it." "I did. And you said I'm free." Tyler's expression softened slightly. "Because you are. That's not the kind of debt anyone should have to pay." The other ranch hands approached, and Tyler thanked them for coming. They exchanged a few words before riding off, leaving Tyler alone with Grace. "Why?" she asked when they were gone. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Tyler looked at her for a long moment. "Because it was the right thing to do," he finally said. "And because no one did it for my sister when she needed it." Grace took in this new information, understanding dawning on her face. What happened to her? Pain flashed across Tyler's features. A story for another time, perhaps. He put his hat back on. "You should check on your father." Grace nodded but hesitated. "Mr. Hayes, thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," he interrupted. "That's the point. You don't belong to me or anyone else." He mounted his horse. "Good evening, Miss Cooper." As he turned to leave, Grace called after him, "Will I see you again?" Tyler paused, looking back at her. "I expect so. Loveland's not that big." With that, he rode away, leaving Grace standing on the porch, watching until he disappeared from view. Inside, William Cooper was stirring, having slept through the entire confrontation. Grace sat heavily in a chair, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. She was safe, her future her own again, because of the unexpected kindness of a man she barely knew. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a typical autumn day in Colorado. Grace rose early, as was her habit, and prepared for work at Jenkins' general store. Her father was still asleep, and she left him a note explaining that Holbrook's debt had been paid and they were safe. She didn't mention Tyler Hayes by name, knowing her father's shame would only deepen at owing such a debt to another man. That was a conversation for later, when William was sober enough to understand. As Grace walked the half-mile into town, she couldn't help scanning the streets for a glimpse of her unexpected savior. But there was no sign of Tyler or any of the Silver Creek hands. Perhaps that was for the best. She wasn't sure what she would say to him in the clear light of day. Mrs. Jenkins greeted Grace at the store with her usual motherly concern. "You look tired, dear. Everything all right at home?" "Yes, madam," Grace replied automatically, tying on her apron. "Just didn't sleep well." The older woman gave her a knowing look, but didn't press further. Mrs. Jenkins and her husband had always been kind to Grace, especially after her mother's death. They had even kept her employed when William's reputation for drinking and gambling began to affect how people treated his daughter. The morning passed quietly, with Grace stocking shelves and helping the occasional customer. Around midday, the bell above the door jingled and she looked up to see Tyler Hayes entering the store. Her heart gave an unexpected leap, which she immediately tried to suppress. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted, hoping her voice sounded normal. "What can I help you with today?" Tyler removed his hat, those piercing blue eyes finding hers across the room. "Miss Cooper, I need some supplies." He glanced around the store, where Mrs. Jenkins was pretending not to watch them with interest. "And perhaps a word with you if you have a moment." Grace nodded, leading him to the back of the store where they kept the feed and tools. "Is everything all right?" she asked once they were relatively private. "Holbrook hasn't caused more trouble, has he?" "No, nothing like that," Tyler assured her. "I wanted to check that you and your father were well." "We are, thanks to you." Grace fidgeted with her apron. "Mr. Hayes, about the money, I told you not to worry about that," he interrupted gently. $500 is not a sum I can ignore," Grace persisted. "I insist on repaying you even if it takes years." Tyler studied her for a moment, taking in her determined expression. "You're proud," he observed. "I respect that, but the debt was never yours to begin with." "It wasn't yours either," Grace countered. A ghost of a smile touched Tyler's lips. "True enough." He seemed to consider something. "Would it ease your mind to have some way of working it off?" Grace nodded cautiously. "Yes, it would. Silver Creek could use help," Tyler said after a moment. "The ranch owner's wife is expecting their third child, and she's been looking for someone to help with the house and the children." Grace blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job, if you want it," Tyler clarified. "The pay is fair, and you'd have a room of your own in the main house." "It would be honest work, Miss Cooper, not charity." The offer was unexpected but tempting. Working at the Jenkins store was respectable, but the pay barely covered their needs, especially with her father's habits. "What about my father?" she asked. "There's work for him too, if he wants it," Tyler said, though his tone suggested he had doubts about William Cooper's reliability. "The ranch always needs hands." Grace bit her lip, considering. "I would need to speak with the Jenkinses. They've been good to me, and I wouldn't want to leave them without notice." "Of course," Tyler agreed. "Mrs. Thornton, the ranch owner's wife, doesn't need help immediately. Think about it and let me know," Grace nodded. "I will, and thank you, Mr. Hayes. Not just for yesterday, but for this opportunity." Tyler replaced his hat. "You saved yourself, Miss Cooper. I just evened the odds a bit." He turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be in town until tomorrow morning if you decide." After he left, Mrs. Jenkins appeared almost immediately at Grace's side. "What did Tyler Hayes want?" she asked, eyes bright with curiosity. "And don't tell me supplies, because that man barely said 2 words to anyone before yesterday." Grace hesitated, then decided the truth or part of it was best. "He offered me a position at Silver Creek Ranch, helping Mrs. Thornton with the house and children." Mrs. Jenkins' eyes widened. "Did he now? And what brought that on?" "He helped my father with something yesterday," Grace said vaguely. "I suppose it's his way of offering further assistance." The older woman studied Grace carefully. "The Thorntons are good people. It would be a fine position for you." She patted Grace's hand. "Better than this old store, that's certain. Mrs. Jenkins, I couldn't possibly leave you without—" "Nonsense," the older woman interrupted. "Mary Wilson's girl has been wanting work, and she's nearly 16 now. We'll manage." She squeezed Grace's hand. "You should take this chance, dear. There's not much future for you here watching your father." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You've been so good to me." "And you to us," Mrs. Jenkins replied warmly. "But young women need opportunities, and this sounds like a good one." By the time Grace left the store that evening, her decision was made. She would accept Tyler's offer. For both practical and personal reasons she wasn't quite ready to examine. At home, she found her father surprisingly sober, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee instead of whiskey. "Gracie," he greeted her, his eyes clearer than they'd been in months. "I read your note." Grace set down her basket. "Then you know we're safe from Holbrook." William nodded, looking older than his 45 years. "What I don't know is how. The note said the debt was paid, but not by whom or how." Grace took a deep breath and told her father everything: how Tyler Hayes had intervened, paid the debt, and confronted Holbrook and his men. William listened in silence, his face growing more haggard with each detail. When she finished, he covered his face with his hands. "What kind of father am I?" he whispered. "I nearly sold my own daughter to cover my gambling debts, and it took a stranger to save you." "Pa, don't," Grace said, not wanting to see him sink further into self-loathing. "What matters is that we have a chance to start fresh." William looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "How?" "I owe a fortune to a cowboy, and my reputation in this town isn't worth spit." Grace told him about Tyler's offer of work at Silver Creek Ranch. "It could be a new beginning for both of us," she finished. "Away from Holbrook and the saloons." Her father was quiet for a long time. "You want to go?" he finally asked. "I think we need to," Grace replied honestly. "There's nothing for us here but debt and bad memories." William nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. You always were the sensible one, like your mother." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I've let you down, Gracie." "Let her down too. But maybe it's not too late to try to be the father you deserve." Grace squeezed his hand, hope and skepticism warring within her. She'd heard promises before, after particularly bad binges or losses. But something felt different this time, perhaps the nearness of their escape, or the shame of having his daughter rescued by another man. "We'll try together," she said softly. The next morning, Grace sought out Tyler at the town's small hotel. He was just leaving for breakfast when she arrived. "Miss Cooper," he greeted her, seeming surprised but pleased. "You're out early." "I wanted to catch you before you left town," she explained. "I've decided to accept your offer both for myself and my father if the position for him still stands." Tyler studied her for a moment. "It does. But I should be clear, your father will need to stay sober if he wants to keep the job. Mr. Thornton runs a tight operation." Grace nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I've told him as much. He seems different since yesterday, determined." "I hope that's true," Tyler said, his tone suggesting he'd seen such promises broken before. "When can you start?" "The Jenkinses have already found a replacement for me," Grace replied. "We could be ready by the end of the week if that suits." "It does," Tyler confirmed. "I'll send a wagon for you and your belongings on Friday morning." As they stood there in the early morning light, Grace felt a strange mixture of gratitude, hope, and something else she couldn't quite name, something that made her heart beat a little faster when those blue eyes met hers. "Mr. Hayes," she began hesitantly, "I still don't fully understand why you've gone to such lengths to help us." Tyler's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes a person just needs someone to believe they deserve better, Miss Cooper." He replaced his hat. "Friday morning, then." As he walked away, Grace couldn't help but feel that her life had irrevocably changed course, and that Tyler Hayes might be more integral to that new direction than either of them realized. True to his word, Tyler sent a wagon on Friday morning. Grace and her father had packed their meager belongings, clothes, a few books, her mother's china teacup, and the family Bible. Everything else they were leaving behind, including the small cabin that had been their home for the past 5 years. The driver was Matthews, the silver-bearded ranch hand who had come to their aid against Holbrook. He helped load their trunks, eyeing William Cooper with undisguised skepticism, but treating Grace with grandfatherly courtesy. "It's about 10 miles to Silver Creek," he informed them as they set off. "Mrs. Thornton has your room ready in the main house, Miss Cooper. Mr. Cooper, you'll be bunking with the hands in the bunkhouse." William nodded, looking nervous but determined in his cleaned and pressed shirt. He hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in 3 days, a record in recent memory. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Matthews." The older man grunted noncommittally. "Hayes vouched for you. Don't make him regret it." The ride took them north of Loveland, through rolling grasslands that eventually gave way to a picturesque valley cradled by distant mountains. Silver Creek Ranch was larger than Grace had imagined, a sprawling operation with a handsome 2-story main house, several outbuildings, a large barn, and fenced pastures where cattle and horses grazed. "The Thorntons run one of the most successful operations in the territory," Matthews explained as they approached. "Started with almost nothing 15 years ago." Grace was impressed and a little intimidated. She'd worked in a general store and kept house for her father, but this was grander than anything she'd experienced. As they pulled up to the main house, a pregnant woman in her early 30s emerged onto the porch, flanked by 2 small children, a boy of about 6 and a girl who looked to be 4. "You must be Grace," the woman called warmly. "I'm Margaret Thornton. Welcome to Silver Creek." Grace climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her best dress nervously. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Thornton. This is my father, William Cooper." Margaret Thornton had kind eyes and an easy smile that immediately put Grace at ease. "Mr. Cooper, Matthews will show you to the bunkhouse and introduce you to the foreman. He'll get you settled." She turned to Grace. "Come inside, dear. You must be tired from the journey." Grace said a quick goodbye to her father, who looked apprehensive but determined as he followed Matthews toward the bunkhouse. Then she followed Mrs. Thornton into the house, the 2 children trailing curiously behind. The interior of the main house was comfortable rather than ostentatious, well-built furniture, polished wood floors covered with woven rugs, and large windows that let in ample light. It smelled of beeswax and fresh bread. "These are my little ones," Margaret said, gesturing to the children. "James and Emma. Say hello to Miss Cooper, children." "Hello," they chorused shyly. "The new baby is due in about 2 months," Margaret explained, resting a hand on her swollen belly. "Which is why your arrival is such a blessing. I find myself tiring more easily these days." "I'm happy to help however I can," Grace assured her. Margaret showed her to a pleasant room on the second floor, smaller than the family bedrooms but far nicer than her room in the cabin had been. It had a real bed with a proper mattress, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a window that overlooked the ranch yard. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Margaret said. "The work isn't difficult, helping with meals, the children, and some light housekeeping. We have a woman who comes in twice a week for the heavy cleaning." "It sounds perfect," Grace replied honestly. Margaret smiled. "Tyler speaks very highly of you, which is saying something. He's not usually so forthcoming with praise." Grace felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Mr. Hayes has been very kind to my family." "Has he?" Margaret looked intrigued. "How interesting. Tyler keeps to himself mostly, though he's been with us for nearly 3 years now. Best horse trainer we've ever had." Before Grace could respond, the sound of running footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Emma burst into the room out of breath. "Mama, Papa and Mr. Hayes are back from town." Margaret shook her head fondly. "Emma, what have I told you about running in the house?" She turned to Grace. "You'll meet my husband at dinner. For now, rest a bit and settle in. We eat at 6. Left alone, Grace unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully in the drawers and on the desk. As she placed her mother's Bible on the bedside table, she found herself thinking about Tyler Hayes. What had brought him to Silver Creek? Why did a man who clearly had education and means choose the life of a ranch hand? And why had he taken such an interest in her situation? She moved to the window, watching the activity below in the ranch yard. Men were returning from their daily work, leading horses to the stables or carrying tools to the barns. She spotted her father talking with a tall man who must be Mr. Thornton, looking more engaged than she'd seen him in years. And then she saw Tyler, leading a magnificent chestnut horse toward the largest stable. Even from a distance, there was something distinctive about him, a quiet confidence in his movements, a straightness to his posture that set him apart. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced up toward her window. Grace stepped back quickly, her heart racing as if she'd been caught doing something improper. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair. Robert Thornton proved to be a genial host, a robust man in his late 30s with a hearty laugh and a clear devotion to his wife and children. Several of the senior ranch hands joined them at the large dining table, including Matthews, the foreman Jack Wilson, and Tyler Hayes. Grace's father was not present. The newer hands took their meals in the bunkhouse, but Robert assured her that the foreman spoke well of William's first day. "Says he knows his way around horses," Robert commented. "That's always useful here." Grace was seated between Margaret and Emma, across from Tyler, who remained quiet for much of the meal, speaking only when directly addressed. Yet she felt his eyes on her occasionally, observing her interactions with the family. After the children were excused, the conversation turned to ranch business, cattle prices, a planned expansion of the eastern pasture, and preparations for winter. Grace listened with interest, learning more about the operation that would now be her home. "Miss Cooper," Robert addressed her during a lull in the conversation, "I understand we have Tyler to thank for bringing you to us." Grace nodded, glancing briefly at Tyler. "Yes, Mr. Hayes was very kind to suggest the position." "Kind isn't usually the first word people associate with Hayes," Matthews chuckled. "Stubborn, maybe, or particular, especially about those horses." Tyler accepted the teasing with good grace. "I simply mentioned that Mrs. Thornton needed help and Miss Cooper needed employment. It seemed a logical arrangement." "Well, we're delighted to have you," Margaret said warmly to Grace. "And your father too, of course." As the meal concluded, the men excused themselves to the porch for pipes and conversation. Margaret showed Grace the kitchen routines, explaining that they shared cooking duties with Mrs. Oakes, the housekeeper who came in during the day. Later, as Grace prepared for bed in her new room, she heard a soft knock at her door. It was Margaret, carrying a small lamp. "I just wanted to check that you have everything you need," the older woman said. "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been so welcoming." Margaret smiled. "We're like a family here at Silver Creek. I hope you'll come to feel that way too." She hesitated, then added, "May I speak frankly, Grace?" "Of course. Tyler told us something of your situation in Loveland, not everything, I'm sure, but enough to understand you've had difficulties." Margaret's expression was compassionate. "Whatever happened there, you have a fresh start here, and your father as well." Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. That means more than I can say." After Margaret left, Grace stood by her window, looking out at the now quiet ranch under the vast canopy of stars. In the distance, she could see the glow of lanterns from the bunkhouse, and closer, on the main house porch, the ember of a pipe or cigarette where someone she couldn't tell who sat alone in the darkness. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. The days quickly fell into a pleasant routine at Silver Creek. Grace rose early, helped with breakfast, saw to the children while Margaret rested in the mornings, assisted with household tasks, and learned the rhythms of ranch life. The work was satisfying. The Thorntons were kind employers, and even the other ranch hands treated her with respect. Her father, too, seemed to be thriving in the new environment. William Cooper had always been good with horses, and the physical labor and structure of ranch work suited him. More importantly, removed from the temptations of town, he remained sober, earning the grudging respect of the other hands. Grace saw Tyler Hayes almost daily, though their interactions were brief and mostly in the company of others. He was often out with the horses, training the young stock or working with the more troublesome animals that other hands couldn't manage. She learned from the others that his skill with horses was nearly legendary in the region, which explained why a wealthy rancher like Robert Thornton employed him despite his reserved nature. About 2 weeks after their arrival, Grace was hanging laundry in the yard when Tyler approached, leading a dappled gray mare. "Miss Cooper," he greeted her. "Settling in well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "Everyone has been most kind." Tyler nodded, patting the mare's neck absently. "And your father, better than I've seen him in years," Grace said honestly. "The work agrees with him and—" She hesitated, then continued, "Being away from certain influences has helped." "Good." Tyler seemed genuinely pleased. "He has skills. Shame to waste them." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the mare nickering softly between them. "She's beautiful," Grace commented, gesturing to the horse. "This is Stella," Tyler said, a hint of pride in his voice. "One of our best brood mares. Just confirmed she's in foal." Grace smiled. "Congratulations. I'm afraid I don't know much about horses beyond the basics." "You ride, though?" Tyler asked. "Not since I was a girl," Grace admitted. "We sold our last horse 3 years ago." Tyler seemed to consider something. "Would you like to learn properly, I mean?" Grace looked at him in surprise. "I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "It's not an imposition," he assured her. "Everyone at Silver Creek should be comfortable on horseback. It's practical." "Then yes," Grace decided. "I'd like that very much. Tomorrow morning before breakfast?" Tyler suggested. "The light is good then, and it's cooler." Grace nodded, suddenly looking forward to the morning in a way she hadn't expected. "I'll be ready." As Tyler led Stella away, Grace found herself watching him go, wondering again about the enigmatic man who had so dramatically altered the course of her life. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. She dressed in her simplest skirt and sturdiest boots, braiding her hair tightly to keep it from her face. When she arrived at the stable, Tyler was already there, brushing down a gentle-looking bay mare. "This is Penny," he introduced. "She's patient and steady good for a beginner." Grace approached the horse cautiously, reaching out to stroke her velvety nose. "Hello, Penny." Tyler demonstrated how to saddle the horse, explaining each step clearly. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Grace tried to memorize the sequence of actions. "Your turn," he said, removing the saddle again. "Best way to learn is by doing." Under his watchful eye, Grace repeated the process. Her first attempt was clumsy, but Tyler's instructions were patient and precise. When she finally tightened the last strap correctly, she looked up to find him watching her with something like approval. "Good," he said simply. "Now mounting." For the next hour, Tyler taught her the basics of horsemanship: how to mount properly, how to hold the reins, the correct posture, and the subtle signals used to direct the horse. His teaching style was straightforward and calm, never making her feel inadequate even when she made mistakes. They stayed in the corral, Penny responding docilely to Grace's inexpert commands as they walked in circles and practiced simple turns. By the time the sun was fully up, Grace felt more confident, and Tyler pronounced her a quick study. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked as they led Penny back to the stable. "Yes, please," Grace replied, surprised by how much she'd enjoyed the lesson. As they unsaddled Penny together, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through Grace. She stepped back quickly, flustered. Tyler seemed not to notice her reaction. "You have a natural seat," he commented. "Good balance." "Thank you," Grace managed, willing her racing heart to slow. "I had an excellent teacher." A ghost of a smile touched Tyler's lips, and for a moment, Grace thought she glimpsed something beyond his usual reserve, a warmth that transformed his features and made him look younger, less guarded. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. "The children will be waking soon." Tyler nodded. "Tomorrow, then." As Grace hurried back to the house, she tried to make sense of her conflicted feelings. Tyler Hayes had saved her from a terrible fate, given her father a chance at redemption, and secured them both respectable employment. She owed him an enormous debt of gratitude. But the flutter in her stomach when he was near, the way her skin tingled where their hands had touched, that was something else entirely. Something dangerous and inappropriate. He was her benefactor, her employer's valued employee, and a man clearly carrying secrets he had no intention of sharing. Developing tender feelings for him would be foolish in the extreme. Yet as the days passed and their morning lessons continued, Grace found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet cowboy with the piercing blue eyes. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, to recognize the rare moments when his reserve slipped to reveal glimpses of dry humor or unexpected gentleness. She learned, too, about his reputation on the ranch. The other hands respected Tyler's skill and work ethic, but maintained a certain distance. He rarely joined in their evening card games or trips to town, preferring the company of his horses or a book in the quiet of his private corner of the bunkhouse. "Hayes keeps himself to himself," Matthews told her one afternoon when she was helping in the kitchen and casually asked about Tyler's background. "Been that way since he arrived. Mr. Thornton hired him after seeing him gentle a wild Mustang no one else could touch. Doesn't talk much about where he came from, and no one asks." "He mentioned a sister once," Grace ventured. Matthews raised an eyebrow. "Did he now? That's more than he's told most of us in 3 years." Her riding lessons with Tyler continued through October, gradually expanding beyond the corral to the meadows and trails surrounding the ranch. Grace proved an apt pupil, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment of the freedom riding provided. One crisp morning in late October, they rode farther than usual, following Silver Creek itself up into the foothills. The aspens were ablaze with golden leaves, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine and coming winter. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed as they stopped to rest the horses by the creek. Tyler nodded, dismounting and helping her down from Penny. The casual touch of his hands at her waist sent that now familiar warmth through her, and she moved away quickly, pretending to adjust her skirt. "The Thorntons own all this?" she asked, gesturing to the surrounding landscape. "To the ridge line," Tyler confirmed, letting the horses drink from the clear stream. "Robert Thornton has built something remarkable here." "You admire him," Grace observed. "I do," Tyler acknowledged. "He's a fair man who's earned everything he has through honest work. Those are rare qualities." Grace studied Tyler's profile as he gazed up at the mountains. "Is that why you stay? Because you respect him?" Tyler turned to look at her, those blue eyes thoughtful. "Partly. And because Silver Creek has become a kind of home." "But not your real home," Grace guessed. A shadow crossed his features. "No, that's long gone." Sensing she was treading on delicate ground, Grace changed the subject. "Margaret says the baby could come any day now. She's hoping for another boy, though Robert insists he wants another daughter." Tyler smiled slightly. "The children adore you." "And I them," Grace replied honestly. "Emma follows me everywhere, and James has decided I need to learn all about cattle brands and rope tying." "You've made a place for yourself here," Tyler observed. "As has your father." Grace nodded gratefully. "Thanks to you." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the play of light on the water. Grace was acutely aware of Tyler beside her, his steady presence, the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him, the controlled strength in his posture. "We should head back," he finally said, sounding almost reluctant. "Storm brewing." He nodded toward the western sky, where dark clouds were gathering over the distant peaks. As they mounted and turned the horses homeward, large snowflakes began to fall, earlier in the season than usual. By the time they reached the ranch yard, the snow was coming down in earnest, and the temperature had dropped dramatically. "Winter's arrived early," Robert Thornton commented as they stabled the horses. "Good thing you got back when you did. This looks to be a real blizzard brewing." He was right. By nightfall, the storm had intensified into a howling tempest, wind driving snow against the windows and drifting against the buildings. The ranch hands brought in additional firewood and checked on the livestock, battling the elements to ensure the animals were secure. Grace helped Margaret prepare extra food, knowing the men would return cold and hungry from their work. When they finally came in, stamping snow from their boots and rubbing numb hands, she served hot coffee and stew, moving efficiently among them. Tyler was among the last to enter, snow crusting his hat and coat. His face was wind-burned, his expression grimmer than usual. "Everything secure?" Robert asked him. "Mostly," Tyler replied, accepting the coffee Grace offered with a nod of thanks. "But there's a problem with the south pasture herd. The creek's rising with the snowmelt coming down from higher up, and they're cut off. If it keeps rising, they could be in trouble." Robert frowned. "How many head?" "About 40, including some of the pregnant heifers." The rancher rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Too valuable to lose. We'll need to move them at first light, assuming we can get through." "If the storm lets up," the foreman added doubtfully, glancing toward the windows where snow still pelted the glass. "I'll go check the creek level again before dawn," Tyler offered. "If there's a window of opportunity, we should take it." Grace felt a twist of worry as she listened to their planning. The storm was fierce, and the thought of anyone venturing out in it, especially Tyler, filled her with dread. Later, as she was clearing dishes, Tyler approached her privately. "Your father volunteered to help with the herd tomorrow," he told her. "I wanted you to know." Grace felt a spike of alarm. "Is it dangerous?" Tyler didn't sugarcoat his answer. "Cold water, bad conditions, yes, there's risk. But he's capable and we need every experienced rider." She nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Thank you for telling me." Tyler studied her face for a moment. "Try not to worry, I'll keep an eye on him." The simple promise eased her fear somewhat. "Be careful yourself," she said softly. "Both of you." Something shifted in Tyler's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips as if he might say more. But then Matthews called his name and the moment passed. "Get some rest," Tyler advised her. "Tomorrow will be a long day for everyone." Grace barely slept that night, listening to the storm rage around the sturdy house and worrying about the morning's mission. She rose before dawn to find Margaret already in the kitchen, her face tense with concern. "Robert's gone with the men," she informed Grace. The creek rose faster than expected. They couldn't wait for daylight. Grace's stomach clenched with fear. "My father, with them," Margaret confirmed, "and Tyler leading them." Together, the women prepared hot food and coffee, keeping it ready for the men's return. The children were unusually subdued, sensing the tension in the house. Even young Emma didn't protest when told she couldn't go outside to play in the new snow. The storm gradually abated as morning advanced, but there was no word from the rescue party. By midday, Grace found herself constantly at the windows, scanning the white landscape for any sign of returning riders. "They know what they're doing," Margaret assured her, though her own worry was evident. "Robert has weathered worse, and Tyler Hayes is the best horseman in the territory." It was late afternoon when the first riders appeared through the curtain of still falling snow. Grace and Margaret rushed to the porch, watching as exhausted men and equally tired horses trudged into the ranch yard. They were driving a small herd of cattle before them, the animals moving sluggishly through the deep snow. Grace searched the arriving group desperately for her father and Tyler. Relief flooded her when she spotted William among the riders, his beard crusted with ice but otherwise appearing intact. But her relief was short-lived when she realized Tyler wasn't with them. Robert dismounted stiffly, coming to embrace his wife before turning to the anxious hands who had stayed behind. "We got most of them," he reported. "Lost 3 to the creek, but the rest are safe." "Where's Tyler?" Grace asked, unable to contain her concern any longer. Robert's expression grew grave. "There was a heifer stuck on the far bank, about to calve. Tyler went after her when the rest of us were bringing the main herd across." The water was rising fast. A section of the bank collapsed. William interjected, having approached in time to hear Grace's question. "Hayes and the heifer both went in. We saw him grab onto a tree downstream but couldn't reach him before we lost sight in the snow." Grace felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her. "Then he's still out there, in this cold," Robert nodded grimly. "Matthews and Wilson stayed to search. The rest of us had to get the herd and ourselves back before dark." "You left him." Grace couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. "It wasn't like that, Gracie," her father said gently. "Hayes himself ordered everyone to get the herd to safety, said he'd make his own way back." Margaret put a steadying arm around Grace's shoulders. "Tyler knows these lands better than anyone," she reminded her. "If anyone can find his way back, it's him." But as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted further, Grace's hope dwindled. Matthews and Wilson returned without success, their faces grim as they reported no sign of Tyler beyond the tree where he'd last been seen. "The creek's too dangerous to search in the dark," Matthews explained to Robert. "We'll go out again at first light." Grace barely touched her dinner, her thoughts with Tyler somewhere in the frigid night. Was he injured? Had he found shelter? Or was he already beyond help, his body frozen in the merciless cold? The thought of losing him, this man who had saved her, taught her, and somehow become central to her world without either of them acknowledging it, was unbearable. She was sitting alone by the fire in the main room, everyone else having retired for the night, when she heard a commotion outside. Rushing to the window, she saw lanterns moving in the yard and heard men's voices calling to each other. Grace threw on a shawl and hurried outside, her heart in her throat. A group of hands had gathered around something. No, someone being helped toward the house. "Tyler," she cried, recognizing him despite his bedraggled state. He looked up at her voice, his face pale with exhaustion and cold but very much alive. He was supported between two ranch hands, clearly struggling to walk, his clothes frozen stiff and his lips blue with cold. "Get him inside, quickly," Robert ordered, having emerged from the house behind Grace. "Margaret, we need hot water and blankets." They brought Tyler into the kitchen, the warmest room in the house with its large stove. As the men helped remove his frozen outer clothing, Grace could see that his right leg was injured, the fabric torn and stained with blood. "Heifer kicked me when we went in the water," Tyler explained through chattering teeth. "Creek carried us both downstream a ways before I could get to shore." "The heifer?" Robert asked. "Lost her," Tyler said grimly. "And the calf. Tried to save them, but—" He shook his head, clearly distressed by the failure despite his own perilous situation. "You're lucky to be alive yourself," Matthews scolded. "What were you thinking, trying to walk back in this cold with that leg?" Tyler's eyes found Grace across the room. "Didn't want anyone worrying unnecessarily." Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the simple statement. She busied herself preparing hot tea with plenty of sugar while Margaret examined Tyler's injured leg. "It's a bad gash, but the cold may have saved you from bleeding too much," the older woman pronounced. "Needs cleaning and stitching, though." "I can do that," Grace offered. Her mother had taught her basic medical care, a necessary skill on the frontier. While Robert and the other men returned to check on the rescued cattle, Grace carefully cleaned Tyler's wound, a deep cut across his thigh that must have been excruciatingly painful during his trek back to the ranch. He endured her ministrations stoically, wincing only slightly when she began stitching the edges together. "You've done this before," he observed. "My mother was skilled with home remedies," Grace explained. "She taught me what she knew." They were alone in the kitchen now, Margaret having gone to prepare a bed for Tyler in the small room off the main floor normally used for storage. The intimacy of the situation, her hands on his bare thigh, his eyes watching her work, made Grace acutely self-conscious. "You could have died out there," she said softly, needing to break the silence. "But I didn't," Tyler replied simply. Grace tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. "When they came back without you, I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Tyler's hand covered hers where it rested on the bandage. "I'm not easy to get rid of, Miss Cooper." The touch of his cold fingers sent warmth radiating up her arm. Grace looked up to find those blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Grace," he said quietly, "I think after everything you might call me Grace." A slight smile touched his lips. "Grace," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "And I'm Tyler, not Mr. Hayes or the cowboy who paid your father's debt." Grace felt her cheeks flush at the reminder of their unusual beginning. "Tyler," she acknowledged with a small nod. Margaret returned then, breaking the moment between them. "The room's ready," she announced. "Robert says you're to stay in the house until that leg heals, Tyler. No arguments." He looked as if he might protest but thought better of it. Yes, madam. With Margaret's help, Grace got Tyler settled in the makeshift bedroom. As they were leaving him to rest, he caught Grace's hand briefly. "Thank you," he said simply. She squeezed his fingers gently. "Rest now. We'll talk tomorrow." That night, Grace lay awake in her bed, replaying the events of the day and examining the feelings she could no longer deny. Somewhere between the riding lessons and today's fear of losing him, Tyler Hayes had become more important to her than she'd ever intended. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Tyler's recovery progressed steadily over the next week. The injury prevented him from riding or doing his usual work with the horses, but it gave him unexpected time in the main house, time that increasingly included Grace's company. She found reasons to check on him throughout the day, bringing meals, fresh bandages, or simply stopping to chat while the children were napping. Tyler was a surprisingly good patient, accepting his temporary confinement with more grace than Margaret had expected. "Must be your nursing," she teased Grace one afternoon. "He's usually restless as a caged mountain lion when he can't work." Grace blushed at the implication but couldn't deny that their relationship was shifting. The formal barriers between them were gradually dissolving, replaced by a comfortable familiarity and growing affection that neither acknowledged directly but both clearly felt. They talked for hours about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they held. Tyler spoke little of his past, but he did share more about his sister, Amelia, who had died 5 years earlier. She was beautiful and kind. He told Grace one evening as they sat by the fire, the rest of the household already retired, too trusting for her own good. A man took advantage of that, charmed her, promised her the world, then abandoned her when she needed him most. Grace understood then what he had meant that day at her cabin, about no one helping his sister when she needed it. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked gently. "Because of Amelia?" Tyler considered the question. "Perhaps at first," he admitted, "but not entirely." His eyes met hers across the firelight. "You have a strength she lacked, a resilience I admired from the beginning." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. "I don't feel particularly strong or resilient most days." "That's often true of the strongest people," Tyler observed. "They don't recognize their own fortitude because they're too busy surviving." As his leg improved, Tyler began taking short walks around the ranch yard, leaning on a cane Robert had fashioned for him. Grace often accompanied him, ostensibly to ensure he didn't overtax himself, though they both knew her presence was no longer about duty. On one such walk, they encountered William Cooper mending tack outside the barn. He greeted them warmly, looking healthier and more content than Grace could remember seeing him in years. "Mr. Thornton's put me in charge of the stable," he told them proudly. "Says I have a way with the equipment as well as the horses." "That's wonderful, Pa," Grace beamed, genuinely pleased by her father's progress. After William returned to his work, Tyler commented, "He's a changed man from the desperate gambler I met in Loveland." "We both are changed," Grace replied softly. "Thanks to you." Tyler shook his head. "I only opened a door. You both walked through it yourselves." They continued their slow circuit, stopping to rest on a bench with a view of the mountains. The December air was crisp but not bitter, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. "Christmas is coming," Grace observed. "Mrs. Thornton says there's always a celebration here at the ranch." Tyler nodded. "The Thorntons make quite an event of it. Everyone from the neighboring ranches attends." "Will you dance at the Christmas gathering?" Grace asked impulsively. Tyler looked surprised by the question. "I'm not much for dancing." "Not even with the right partner," Grace challenged gently. Something flickered in Tyler's eyes, a warmth that made her heart race. "Perhaps," he conceded. with the right partner. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings and possibilities. Grace found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't resist. Tyler's hand found hers on the bench between them, his fingers entwining with hers. "Grace," he began, his voice low and uncertain, but whatever he meant to say was interrupted by Emma's voice calling from the house. "Miss Grace, Mama needs you. The baby's coming." The spell broken, they both stood quickly. Tyler squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Go. Mrs. Thornton will need you." Grace hurried to the house, her mind spinning with both the excitement of the baby's imminent arrival and the tantalizing nearness of whatever had been about to happen between her and Tyler. Margaret Thornton's labor progressed rapidly. By midnight, she had delivered a healthy baby boy, whom she and Robert named Samuel. Grace assisted the midwife throughout, gaining a new appreciation for both the danger and wonder of childbirth. When it was over and mother and baby were resting comfortably, Grace finally emerged from the bedroom, exhausted but exhilarated. To her surprise, Tyler was waiting in the main room, apparently having refused to retire until he heard the news. "A boy," Grace told him, smiling tiredly. Perfect in every way. Relief washed over Tyler's face. "And Mrs. Thornton, tired but well," Grace assured him. "The midwife says she's strong as an ox." Tyler smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face and made Grace's heart flip in her chest. That's good news indeed. He insisted on walking her to the foot of the stairs, though his own room was on the main floor. As they paused at the bottom step, Tyler reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're remarkable, Grace Cooper," he said softly. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well," he murmured, then turned and walked back to his room, leaving Grace frozen on the step, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. The arrival of baby Samuel brought joy to Silver Creek Ranch, and the preparations for Christmas added to the festive atmosphere. Grace found herself busier than ever, helping Margaret with the infant while also assisting with holiday arrangements. Tyler returned to the bunkhouse once his leg was sufficiently healed, resuming his duties with the horses though still avoiding any strenuous riding. Their private moments became fewer, but the connection between them had undeniably deepened. Each glance, each brief touch when their paths crossed, carried greater significance. A week before Christmas, a letter arrived for Tyler. Grace noticed his expression darken as he read it, and later that day she overheard him discussing something urgent with Robert Thornton. That evening, Tyler sought her out as she was finishing her chores in the kitchen. "I need to go to Denver," he said without preamble. "Business that can't wait." Grace felt a stab of disappointment. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning." "I should be back before Christmas, assuming the trains are running on schedule." She nodded, trying not to show how much his imminent departure affected her. "Is everything all right?" Tyler hesitated. "An old matter that requires attention, nothing for you to worry about." But there was something in his manner that concerned her attention she hadn't seen since their earliest encounters. "Tyler, if there's anything I can do—" "There isn't," he interrupted, more brusquely than was his habit with her. Seeing her hurt expression, he softened immediately. "I'm sorry. This is complicated. Will you tell me about it when you return?" Grace asked. Tyler's gaze held hers for a long moment. "Yes," he finally promised. "When I return, we'll talk properly about many things." The words sent a flutter of anticipation through her, despite her worry. Whatever was taking him to Denver, he intended to come back, and when he did, it seemed they might finally address the feelings growing between them. Tyler left early the next morning, before Grace was awake. She found herself counting the days until his expected return, trying not to imagine all the things that might prevent it. 4 days before Christmas, a fierce snowstorm descended on the region, halting travel and isolating the ranch. Grace tried not to worry, telling herself Tyler was safely in Denver and would return when conditions improved. But as Christmas Eve approached with no sign of him and no word, her concern grew. The Thorntons' Christmas celebration went ahead as planned, though on a smaller scale due to the weather preventing guests from neighboring ranches from attending. The main house was decorated with pine boughs and ribbons. A large tree stood in the corner of the main room, and delicious smells filled the kitchen as Grace and Margaret prepared the feast. William Cooper joined them for Christmas Eve dinner, looking happier and healthier than he had in years. He presented Grace with a small gift, a hand-carved wooden horse which he had made himself. "It's beautiful, Pa," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful present. "Tyler's been teaching me carving," William explained. "Says I have a natural eye for it." The mention of Tyler cast a momentary shadow over the gathering. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm sure Hayes will be back as soon as the trains are running again. No use worrying about him, he's as resourceful as they come." But Grace did worry, especially as the night wore on with no sign of his return. After everyone else had retired, she remained by the window in the main room, watching the moonlit snow and hoping against hope to see a lone rider approach. The sound of the door opening startled her from her vigil. She turned to see Margaret entering in her dressing gown, baby Samuel in her arms. "This little one is restless tonight," Margaret explained. "I thought walking might soothe him." She studied Grace's face in the firelight. "You're worried about Tyler." It wasn't a question. Grace nodded, not bothering to deny it. "He should have been back by now." Margaret settled into a chair, adjusting Samuel against her shoulder. "May I speak frankly, Grace?" "Of course." "I've known Tyler Hayes for 3 years, and in that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know what you mean." Margaret smiled knowingly. "I think you do, and I think you feel the same way about him." Unable to deny the truth, Grace simply nodded. "Tyler is a good man," Margaret continued, "but he carries burdens from his past that he rarely shares. Whatever took him to Denver may be part of that past." "He promised to tell me when he returned," Grace said quietly. "Then he will," Margaret assured her. "Tyler Hayes is a man of his word." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Samuel's occasional coos. Eventually, Margaret rose to return to bed, pausing to touch Grace's shoulder gently. "He'll come back," she said with certainty. "Men like Tyler always find their way home when there's someone worth returning to." After Margaret left, Grace remained by the window a while longer before finally retiring to her own room. Sleep eluded her as she wondered where Tyler was tonight and what complicated business had taken him away. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the storm having finally passed. The children were up at first light, eager to open their presents and celebrate the holiday. Grace put on a cheerful face for their sake, joining in their excitement and helping Margaret prepare the special breakfast. As they were clearing away the breakfast dishes, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. Robert went to the window, then broke into a wide smile. "Well, look who's made it home for Christmas after all," he announced. Grace's heart leapt. She hurried to the door, not caring who noticed her eagerness, and stepped onto the porch just as Tyler dismounted from his horse. He looked tired and cold, but his face lit up when he saw her. "Merry Christmas," he called, striding toward the house. "Merry Christmas," Grace replied, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "We were worried. Trains were stopped for 2 days because of the storm," Tyler explained as he reached the porch. "I ended up riding the last 20 miles." Before she could respond, the door burst open behind her, and the children tumbled out, shouting greetings and demanding to know if Tyler had brought them presents from the city. He laughed a free, unrestrained sound Grace had rarely heard from him and produced small packages from his saddlebags. "Let the man come inside and warm up before you pester him to death," Robert chided good-naturedly, ushering everyone back into the house. Throughout the festive Christmas dinner, Grace found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Tyler. Something about him seemed different, lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. He participated in the conversation more than usual, even joining in when Robert led the family in Christmas carols. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the celebration was winding down, that Tyler managed to speak to Grace privately. He found her in the kitchen, putting away the last of the special china plates. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Merry Christmas, Grace." She accepted it with surprise. "You didn't need to bring me anything." "I wanted to," Tyler replied simply. Grace carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small book of poetry, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening the leather-bound volume reverently. "You mentioned once that you loved poetry," Tyler explained, "and these particular poems, well, they seemed fitting." Grace looked up at him, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you." "I didn't get you anything. You've given me more than you know," Tyler interrupted softly. He glanced around the busy kitchen. "Could we talk? Somewhere private?" Grace nodded, her heart beginning to race. "The study should be empty." They slipped away to Robert's small study, closing the door behind them. Tyler stood by the window for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts while Grace waited nervously. "My trip to Denver," he finally began, turning to face her, "was to settle some unfinished business from my past." Grace nodded encouragingly. "The complicated matter you mentioned." "Yes." Tyler took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you I've never shared with anyone here at Silver Creek. Not even the Thorntons know the full story." He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair opposite her. "My full name is Tyler Hayes Blackwood. I come from a wealthy Boston family with interests in banking and railroads." He smiled wryly at her startled expression. "Not what you expected from a ranch hand, I imagine." "No," Grace admitted. "Though I always suspected you had education beyond most cowboys." Tyler nodded. "Harvard, actually, followed by a promising career in my father's bank. I was engaged to the daughter of another prominent family, a match arranged more for business than affection, though Caroline was a lovely woman." Grace tried to ignore the pang of jealousy at the mention of another woman. "What happened, my sister Amelia?" Tyler continued, his expression darkening. "She fell in love with a man named James Holbrook." Grace gasped. "Holbrook, not Elias Holbrook's nephew," Tyler confirmed grimly. "James was handsome, charming, and utterly without conscience. He seduced Amelia, promised to marry her, then abandoned her when she told him she was with child." Understanding dawned on Grace. "That's why you intervened in Loveland. It wasn't just about me, it was about Holbrook." "Partly," Tyler acknowledged. "When I heard his name and then learned what he planned for you, it was like history repeating itself. I couldn't stand by this time." "What happened to Amelia?" Grace asked gently. Pain flashed across Tyler's face. "She was devastated by James's abandonment and terrified of the scandal. Our father was a rigid man, obsessed with the family's reputation. When he discovered her condition, he disowned her." Tyler's hands clenched into fists. "I tried to help her, but I was away on business when she took her own life." Grace reached out impulsively, covering his clenched hand with her own. "Oh, Tyler, I'm so sorry." He turned his hand to clasp hers. When I returned and learned what had happened, I was consumed with guilt and rage. I confronted my father, denounced his cruelty, and broke off my engagement, causing exactly the kind of scandal he had tried to avoid. "And James Holbrook?" Grace asked. "I tracked him to Chicago, intending to call him out for what he'd done. But when I found him, he was already ruined, gambling debts, alcohol, living in squalor. Killing him would have been a mercy." Tyler's expression was hard. "Instead, I left him to his misery and headed west, determined to leave my old life behind." "But the Holbrooks followed you," Grace surmised. "Elias came to Loveland." Tyler nodded. "Not deliberately, I think. The West isn't that big when you consider the limited number of men with money and ambition. I recognized him immediately in Loveland, though he didn't know me, James, and I had never met." "Why Denver?" Grace asked, returning to his recent trip. "What unfinished business took you there?" Tyler's expression softened. "My father died 2 months ago. His lawyers have been trying to locate me since then. The letter that arrived was from my mother, asking me to come to Denver to meet with the family attorney." "To claim your inheritance," Grace guessed. "Yes, my father apparently had a change of heart in his final years. He left everything divided equally between me and my mother, with a substantial trust established in Amelia's name to help young women in difficult circumstances." Tyler's voice betrayed his complex emotions about this posthumous gesture. "My mother insisted I accept my share to honor his final wishes, if nothing else." Grace tried to process all these revelations. "So you're wealthy now?" Tyler smiled slightly at her bewilderment. "On paper, yes. Though I haven't decided what to do with the money or the Blackwood business interests." "Will you go back to Boston?" Grace asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Tyler's eyes locked with hers. "That depends," he said quietly. "On what?" "On you, Grace." Tyler rose from his chair and moved to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "These past months, getting to know you, watching your strength and kindness, I've found something I never expected to find again after Amelia died. Hope, purpose, joy." He paused, searching her face. "Love." Grace's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Tyler, I love you, Grace Cooper," he said simply. "I think I began falling in love with you that first day in Loveland when you stood on your porch and faced down 4 men with nothing but courage and dignity." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. You saved me, gave my father a second chance. How could I presume to want more?" Tyler reached up to cup her cheek tenderly. "You never needed saving, Grace. You just needed someone to clear the path so you could save yourself." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "And you've saved me too, in ways you can't imagine." He rose slightly, still kneeling, and took both her hands in his. "I don't care about the Blackwood fortune or what society expects of me. I only care about building a life with you if you'll have me." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Grace Cooper, will you marry me?" Joy surged through Grace, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Tyler, I will marry you." Tyler's face transformed with happiness. He leaned forward, one hand moving to cradle the back of her neck, and finally, his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. When they eventually broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Tyler rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you'd think less of me when you knew my true background," he admitted. "That you'd see me as just another rich Easterner playing at being a cowboy." Grace shook her head. "I know who you are, Tyler Hayes or Blackwood, or whatever name you choose. You're the man who said she's free when others would have claimed me as payment. The man who teaches patiently, rides fearlessly, and loves completely." She touched his face gently. Those things matter far more than your name or your bank account. Tyler kissed her again, sealing their understanding and their future with a promise more binding than any legal document. They emerged from the study to find the Thornton family, and the ranch hands gathered for evening festivities. Robert was the first to notice their clasped hands and matching expressions of joy. "Well now," he said with a knowing smile, "it seems Christmas has brought an additional blessing to Silver Creek this year." Tyler looked at Grace, who nodded encouragingly. "I've asked Grace to marry me," he announced to the room, "and she's done me the great honor of accepting." Cheers and congratulations erupted around them. Margaret embraced Grace warmly, whispering, "I told you he'd come home to you." William Cooper approached them last, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd live to see my Gracie so happy," he said, voice thick with emotion. He extended his hand to Tyler. "You're a better man than I deserved for a son-in-law, but I'm grateful beyond words." Tyler shook his hand firmly. "We both love her, Mr. Cooper. That's a good foundation for any family." As the celebration continued around them, Tyler drew Grace aside for a moment. "There's something else I should tell you," he said. "While I was in Denver, I purchased some land near here, a small ranch about 10 miles east of Silver Creek." Grace's eyes widened. "Our own place," Tyler nodded. "It needs work, but the location is good, plenty of water, good grazing land. I thought we might build something there together." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Unless you'd prefer Boston or Denver, I have properties in both cities now." Grace laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Tyler Hayes Blackwood, do I look like a city woman to you? Of course I want our own ranch." She squeezed his hands. "As long as I'm with you, I'm home." That night, after the festivities wound down and the household retired, Grace stood alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The cold was bitter, but she barely felt it, warmed by the happiness glowing within her. The door opened behind her and Tyler stepped out, draping a warm blanket around her shoulders. "Stargazing?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Grace leaned back against his solid warmth. "Giving thanks," she corrected. "6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now—" She turned in his arms to face him. "Now everything is just beginning." Tyler smiled, his face more open and relaxed than she had ever seen it. "I was thinking about names for our ranch," he said. "What do you think of Freedom Ranch?" Grace's heart swelled with love for this complicated, honorable man who had changed her life with 4 simple words. "She's free." "It's perfect," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the Christmas stars shone above their new beginning. The wedding of Tyler Hayes Blackwood and Grace Cooper took place the following spring, when the meadows around Silver Creek were carpeted with wildflowers. It was a simple ceremony held outdoors, with Robert Thornton standing as Tyler's best man and Margaret as Grace's matron of honor. William Cooper, now 6 months sober, proudly walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle. The guest list included not only the Silver Creek Ranch hands, but also neighboring ranchers and townspeople from Loveland who had come to know and respect the couple. Tyler's mother traveled from Boston for the occasion, a dignified woman whose reserve melted visibly when she saw her son's happiness. Even Mrs. Jenkins closed her store for the day to attend, beaming with approval as Grace and Tyler exchanged their vows. "I promise to walk beside you, not in front of you or behind you," Tyler said, his voice steady and sure as he held Grace's hands in his. "To respect your freedom and nurture your strength, to love you faithfully all the days of my life." Grace, radiant in a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, responded with equal conviction. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with courage and hope, to love you completely and honestly through all the seasons of our life together." The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under lantern light. True to his word, Tyler danced with grace, surprising everyone with his grace and skill. "Another hidden talent of yours, Mr. Blackwood," Grace teased as he guided her expertly through a waltz. "One of many I hope to share with you, Mrs. Blackwood," he replied, his blue eyes twinkling with promises. Work on Freedom Ranch had begun immediately after their engagement. Tyler's inheritance provided the means to build a comfortable home and outfit the operation properly. But they both insisted on doing much of the work themselves, wanting to pour their own labor and love into their new beginning. William Cooper joined them in their venture, taking charge of the stables and horse breeding program. His skills with horses had always been exceptional, and without alcohol clouding his judgment, he proved to be a valuable partner. The trust Tyler placed in him completed his transformation from broken gambler to respected horseman. By the time of their wedding, the main house was completed not as grand as the Thornton residence but solid and welcoming, with large windows that filled the rooms with light, and a wide porch where they could watch the sunset over their land. They moved in the day after their wedding, driving a wagon loaded with wedding gifts and personal belongings down the well-worn trail from Silver Creek. As they approached the ridge that overlooked their property, Tyler stopped the horses. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, helping Grace down from the wagon. Together they stood on the ridge, arms around each other, surveying the future they would build together. The neat white house nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, the red barn and corral, the creek that meandered through pastureland where eventually their own herds would graze. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Better than any dream I could have imagined." Life at Freedom Ranch quickly fell into pleasurable routines. Tyler applied his business acumen to establishing their operation, focusing on breeding and training quality horses rather than competing with larger cattle operations like Silver Creek. Grace kept the house and gardens, but also worked alongside Tyler in training the gentler mounts, developing a reputation of her own for working with nervous or injured animals. They remained close with the Thorntons, visiting regularly and supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of ranch life. When a drought threatened the region the following summer, it was Tyler who organized the neighboring ranchers to share water resources and ensure everyone's survival. News from the East occasionally reached them. James Holbrook died in Chicago that winter, alone and forgotten. Elias Holbrook eventually sold his Loveland businesses and moved further west, his reputation for cruelty following him. The trust established in Amelia's name began its work in Boston, providing sanctuary and opportunities for young women in circumstances similar to those Grace had narrowly escaped. By their first anniversary, Grace had joyful news to share. On a warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, she placed Tyler's hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll be 3 by Christmas," she told him, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Are you certain?" Grace nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Tyler gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, "for this gift, for your love, for everything." "For what?" Grace asked, leaning back to see his face. "For loving you, that's as natural as breathing." "For showing me that the past doesn't have to define the future," Tyler said earnestly. "For helping me become the man I wanted to be instead of the man my father expected or my guilt demanded." Grace touched his face tenderly. "And thank you for freeing me not just from Hallbrook, but from fear, from limits, from a life half-lived." Their son, William Tyler Blackwood, was born on a snowy December night, with Margaret Thornton assisting as midwife and William Cooper pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door with his son-in-law. The baby had Tyler's blue eyes and a strong set of lungs that announced his arrival to the entire household. "He's perfect," Tyler said in awe as he held his son for the first time, tears unashamedly tracking down his face. Just like his mother, life expanded to accommodate their growing family. Tyler built a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, filling it with toys he carved himself during the long winter evenings. Grace recovered quickly from the birth, her natural resilience serving her well in motherhood as it had in all other challenges. William Cooper proved to be an adoring grandfather, spending hours walking the colicky baby when Grace needed rest, or entertaining the growing boy with stories of horses and the early days of the West. His relationship with Tyler deepened into genuine friendship and mutual respect, healing old wounds for both men. Freedom Ranch prospered under their care. By the time young Will was 3, they had established a reputation for breeding and training the finest horses in the territory. Buyers came from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City to purchase their stock, and Tyler's innovative breeding programs were discussed in agricultural journals. Their family grew again with the arrival of Emma Rose 2 years after Will, and then Thomas James 2 years after that. Their home rang with children's laughter and the everyday sounds of a loving family. Through it all, Tyler and Grace's bond only strengthened. The passion of their early days matured into a deep, abiding love built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. They faced the challenges of frontier life together: harsh winters, threatening wildfires, economic uncertainties, drawing strength from each other when circumstances tested their resolve. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tyler surprised Grace with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children on one side and a tiny pressed wildflower on the other. "From the meadow where we were married," he explained as she examined it with delight. "A reminder of our beginning." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge above their land. Grace leaned against Tyler's shoulder, content in the peaceful moment. "Are you happy, Tyler?" she asked softly. "With this life we've built." He turned to look at her, the years having added character to his handsome face but done nothing to diminish the love in his eyes. "Beyond measure," he replied honestly. "There are days I still can't believe how fortunate I am to have found you, to have our children, to have created this haven." Grace smiled, understanding completely. "From debt and desperation to this abundance, sometimes it seems like a dream." Tyler shook his head. "Not a dream. A choice, many choices made day after day, to trust, to work, to forgive, to love." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "The best choice I ever made was saying those words on your porch in Loveland." "She's free," Grace quoted softly. "We both are," Tyler amended. "Free to choose our path, free to love without conditions, free to build the life we imagined." As they sat together under the vast Colorado sky, the house behind them filled with their sleeping children, their land stretching peacefully around them, Grace knew with absolute certainty that this was what true freedom meant: not the absence of bonds, but the presence of the right ones, freely chosen and joyfully maintained. And it had all begun with a debt, 4 threatening men, and a cowboy with the courage to say 3 simple words that changed everything. "She's free."